So this morning, what we wanted to talk through was a little bit of the article itself that just went out in the GRIP-Birkman newsletter, talking a little bit about values. Over the next series of months, you'll see that we're going to be talking more about some of these core values. Indirectly, how they relate to GRIP-Birkman, probably more so than usual. Usually, there's probably a direct a more direct connection to that, but we really feel like these values, these IDOE values, are extremely important. And so this first month, we decided to talk about overall this idea of caring for one another and how we do that effectively. And some of the skills that are required in order for us to be able to do that. What does it mean for us to connect well? So before we dig into that, just gonna check and see, did you have a chance to read the article this month? Yeah, seeing some heads nod there. Okay, all right. So before I go into much description of it, would love to just hear from you. What stood out? What sort of connected with you from that? And yeah, what was something, either the wording made sense or you thought about it a little bit differently? Talk to me a little bit about just what you saw there. And Tony, if you want to look it up, you can go to gripbirkman.com. It's on there, but really probably the conversation, you'll be able to jump in pretty quick. That's really covering three foundational value or ideas, three skills within this idea, or four.
Well, as I read the article, I just started marking it up as I went through. Right up at the top, you said we thirst for belonging. That's so huge. So the rest of the article just kind of made sense after that, and obviously the I to we community. And you made or whoever wrote this, the middle of the second page, I guess, where it starts, secondly, we must learn to confess. And the last line there, it's bold, it's Christ revealing, it is expected. I don't think it's expected by most people. I think it's expected when you think about the community that we're part of, but I don't think people expect that. It kind of shocks them when somebody does something like that.
Agreed. I never looked at it quite as much of an expectation, and I'll use that word intentionally. I never really viewed it that way until I really dug into that parable, into that story a little bit more, with the unforgiving debtor that essentially he chose not to forgive even though he had been forgiven, and so pretty dire consequences for him. But yeah, and it's interesting on the confession piece. It's good. Someone else, what stood out?
John, I was looking at the last of that, the whole forgiveness thing. And often I think when I read it, I was thinking, most of us think of forgiveness as in, you've wronged me, therefore I'm going to forgive you. And what kind of clicked in my mind is the number of times that I've worked with teams of people that in the middle of a conversation, they discover their personality difference or their gift mix differences. And suddenly there's this thing this looking across table saying, that's why you do that. That's why you react when this certain way. And in that access is saying, okay, now I can move from irritation to appreciation. And it's like it's offering forgiveness, that the tensions that come up in the context of this team, in this group, are actually healthy. And there's an innate kind of willingness to overlook the irritation side, because this person sees the whole world different than I do, is the willingness to overlook the irritation side to see the better of it. And it's kind of this tacit willingness to forgive that makes a team function at its highest level. And that really struck me as I was reading the article, saying, no, I think we sometimes take forgiveness and categorize it in one little area, but in this whole Ida we process, as we've been thinking about this, as what our values, forgiveness actually carries another whole dimension in our understanding of how we function as teams. And so anyway, that was I don't know why I spent quite a bit of time mulling that over and thinking about forgiveness in a little different way.
So with that, Ken, tease that out a little bit more for us. So then does that require is it a verbal forgiveness at that point, by way of, I forgive you, but really it's not I'll say nobody's doing anything wrong, right? Our gift mixes are just challenging. So in your experience, what if that needs to be verbalized to grow the team?
Often it does, and part of that verbalization is, I'm sorry for resenting the way you act, or I'm sorry for reacting the way that I have. Please forgive me for that, because from here on in, I'm going to value you. And several times I've had to stop the conversations when those ahas come up, stop and say, so what does this mean? Like, what does this mean? And, you guys are catching something here. What is it going to mean? And how are we going to apply that? And that kind of forgiveness, I think, yeah, it has to be verbal. It's emotional, but it often has to be, I have reacted wrongly, or I've treated you wrongly, or I've dismissed you because you saw things different than I did, and I didn't understand the value of that, and I'm sorry. Please forgive me. It's an incredible dynamic that happens in this understanding of teams. So, yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. Sorry. Hopefully don't mind me jumping to forgiveness. You have affirmation and confession first, but yeah.
Conversation slows down. We're going back line by line, just so everybody knows. No, I'm not lying.
I think it's interesting, though, that you're putting the emphasis on it needing to be verbal to be actionable in the community. But I think a lot of times when people are in kind of a relational confrontation like that, it's an easy thing for somebody to say verbally, I forgive you, but actually not have it come from an impact where they've actually been impacted in their heart. And I think the realizations that the insights that come from going through a GRIP-Birkman and seeing people's aha moments, that when they verbalize it, it's actually coming from a heart change, as opposed to just being verbal and not really knowing if there's something going on inside, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it totally makes sense, and I think it goes to the part that I probably control more. Maybe this isn't accurate. Let me tease it out. I can confess, that's on me, right? That I'm willing to state that. So when I have the aha of, oh, you know what? The fact that I pull away from a group, right? I'll just go to circle square language here for a second. The fact that I withdraw when I get fatigued from too much group interaction, that can have a negative impact on the team. I need to be willing to confess that first, in as much as then you, as my team members, your role then becomes the role of forgiveness, right? Of forgiving that, and of then helping address how we're going to handle that as a team moving forward. So the forgiveness piece, if I'm not expecting the necessity of forgiving, I think that's where, especially in a Western culture, it would be interesting to sort of think through this from a cultural lens as well, that forgiveness, we get a little lackadaisical, where it isn't necessarily as heart driven all the time, and because of honor shame cultures, they have just a different way of approaching this idea of confession and forgiveness in that.
I play with that a little bit more.
Please tease it out.
Okay, so if I withdraw from my team because I'm fatigued and I'm totally oblivious to what I've done, and it surfaces, that first time, is that a confession? Is that an apology? And does that make a difference in how the team's going to interact with that? Do you catch what I'm asking there? It's like,
Someone
if I
restate.
if I wrong somebody, I need to confess that I've done that.
Mhm.
If I be me and I'm unaware that it impacts somebody else negatively, are we looking for a confession there? Or are we looking for an apology and awareness, kind of growing together? Now, if I continue to do that, then I'm now wronging people. And I'm probably aware, or I've got some issues going on that probably need help in a different way. Just trying to think that through, how that might affect the team. If I do something unaware and now this is this confession, forgiveness, affirmation process, will that negatively discourage others from voicing their awarenesses then, if it's got to be that involved, at least on the initial end of becoming aware or learning ourselves?
My initial reaction is we don't end our team builds with a confession and forgiveness time. We end them with an affirmation time.
Mhm.
And so in my mind, this is sort of where that progression comes into play. There's a whole, it's a whole different level of team that's willing to verbally confess and forgive, especially in a group setting. That's a different level team, and the number of times that our teams get to that point, I'm going to contend it's not certainly not over 50% of the time. It's going to be a much smaller margin. So I think, again, this is where that progression becomes so important, because to that point, I think the acknowledgement or the understanding, the awareness component initially is huge, right? And then I think that there's sort of going to a personal step of, man, I know it impacts my team leader, Ken. So I want to have that conversation with Ken and see if it's safe to have that conversation, because there's a safety about this. There's a, can I trust you with this part of who I am, that then leads me to a place of, how do I have the conversation in a larger group, make it safe, and then sort of that direct sort of calling it out on myself or on others. So, I would say you're at a very mature team if you're going to, have an aha, and directly from there make it an apology, a confession. Anything more than an acknowledgement is saying a lot about the team, in my opinion.
It's interesting how these go together. I'm just thinking of I had a personal situation, if you don't mind me sharing a personal situation. So I'm working in a team, very close team. We were in a 3-day time together, and it was pretty intense. And I'm a blue circle square. And so there comes a point in time in which the result of that is, when I've been around people enough, I need to withdraw, and I need to some time alone or with a small group of people. And I was confronted by that by the team leader, and saying, we had a break, and he just said, "Ken, you're distant. What happened?" But he started and he said that first, and then he did the affirmation. I need you to be involved in this discussion. This team needs your input. And I'm really irritated when I see you withdrawing. And so it opened up, there's this affirmation, then a confession about his own irritation, and then a call for me to say, can you stay engaged? What do we have to do to keep you engaged? And it was an interesting process, but that's something that so then I was able to say, I've just had enough. Give me an hour. Can we take an hour break? Can I go for a walk? Can I do it forever? I'll be so much more engaged at that point. And he said, sure, let's do that. Let's all take an hour break because we got some heavy work to do today. And it was an interesting, but we actually followed that very affirmation, confession of his own feelings, his own concern, followed by my confession, and then this mutual, what do we have to do to work this out? That to me is what a strong team looks like. You're able to do those things. There's conflict in a team. There's tension there, but the ability to work through it in a healthy way, and with affirmation, confession, and then forgiveness, is what makes a team strong.
I'm kind of a newer coach to all of these things, but what can you share a little bit? What are some of the coaching questions that you all use with trying to help people in this affirmation, confession, and then forgiveness part in a team build? What are some of the things that you found that are really helpful as you help people come to this team awareness, but do it in a gentle way that it's not so shocking or something?
Waiting to see if anyone else is going to jump in on that. So a couple of different things, Thomas. One, as far as the affirmation point, I don't even make that. That's not true. There are a couple of more structured activities that I like to do that really force the hand of the affirmation in a very intentional way and talk about the role of affirmation. So that's one of the affirmation in these is definitely something that is a very real conversation, a very real component of that. So the two activities that I tend to use, or we tend to use, one is the gifts circle. So having the different gifts around in a circle, having those individuals stand by their primary gift, reading that definition of the gift, but then allowing the group to affirm that individual for that gift. How have you seen Thomas use the gift of exhortation or the gift of teaching? You know, talk to Thomas about that. What does that look like? So there's that one that is a very intentional, how have you observed it? Really important on a spiritual gifts component or a spiritual gift piece to do that because of the joy, power, fruit aspect of it, to allow others to speak into that. The other is at the end, I'm trying to think of the last time that I did a team build in any setting, secular or in a with a Christian leadership team, when I didn't end with affirmation. It's just sort of a component that now I incorporate. It depends on the group as to how I might do it, but at the end, we'll at least go around and say, here, like to provide an opportunity. Think affirmation is a huge component of any team, and so I want to give you the space to be able to do that. And so then go through the rules of affirmation for the activity, which are, speak to the person, not about the person. No backhanded compliments. I used to think you were ugly, but now you're pretty. No sort of only one thing, just so that they don't get into a monologue. And then if they're speaking to you, then you just get to say thank you or receive. You don't get to rebuttal. And so I lay that out really structured in those two places. As far as in other places, the affirmation, the place where it probably comes up the most is in team styles, where you're really transferring, or you're really directly asking the question from who do you need and who do you conflict with. The coaching question that I tend to go right alongside with that one is, well, why do you think God has him on this team? And I say that a little bit tongue in cheek, but really it's shifting, it's forcing that perspective change on the fact that, well, they shouldn't be on this team because I always conflict with them. Let's just get rid of them and my life would be a lot easier. To they're valuably contributing how, and sometimes, not always, but sometimes I'll say, well, what of that do you need to communicate to that individual? How do you need to communicate that you need that individual or that they're adding value? What does that look like? How do you want to do that? And sometimes at that point, that's where they might bring up a confession piece. But a lot of times it may just be an affirmation moving forward. So those are a couple of the ways that I'll tie it into a very specific GRIP-Birkman team build, or even just a wider team build. Other questions that you guys use or thoughts?
I was going to say, yeah, if I can jump in, I think to me, again, it's the team build and bodybuilding roles. And when a team is able to understand that a let's go team style and a let's be careful team style are by definition going to have tension, because one's saying, look, just make decisions. The other's saying, I'm not willing to make a decision until I know that it's the right one. And when you can dialogue about the fact that those team styles often create conflict in a group, and then understanding that what your need is actually the most valuable person in the group to you. That person that bugs you most may actually be the most valuable person to keep you from either holding your group up or moving it forward. And then you move into the bodybuilding roles, and you understand the difference between an equipping releaser and a supporting releaser, and realize that they're both releasers, but they look at how they relate to people differently. Those kinds of discussions, in my experience, especially after you've understood the gift circle, just all sorts of light bulbs go off in groups as you begin to see how that works together and understand that God created all of us and he gave us very different gifts, and we need all of them in the building of the body. And of course, mine have always been in church or religious groups. So I've not had to do it from the non. For me, it always comes out of the grip.
I appreciate your language, Ken. I think one of the things that I heard in Thomas's question is, how do we do this in a way that's not so shocking? And whenever you use the language of confession and forgiveness in a group context, particularly if there isn't a sense of safety, that kind of language can be quite shocking. And so, the other language that we've been talking about here is awareness, insight, and having a sense of how that our particular way of engaging plays out within the group. There's a different kind of language that somehow makes it, if I can use this, easier for people to work with and to hear, and maybe even embrace more fully on the front end, as opposed to the need for confession and forgiveness and so on.
That's good. I think the discovery, the part of the way that to progress someone through, even just on the grip side, is, and even from a gifts perspective, is to look at the liabilities as well on the gifts and say, oh, which of those have you seen? Which of those, can sometimes pop up for you? Oh, what happens when that's occurred? Oh, how do you tend to respond? How do you tend, if that's what somebody experienced, how do you tend to clean up after that? How do you tend to go back and make it right with that individual if, gift of exhortation, if you've come across too strong and somebody leaves with their feelings really hurt, how do you handle that the next day, that next interaction? What does that look like for you? And what do you think their perception is of you in that interaction? So that's where the one-on-one is a little bit easier for some of those types of dialogues, to really, think through the gift liabilities, think through that needs. I think on the team build, the progression of questions is really well, sometimes it is questions, sometimes it's really just it's what's going to stand out, what has stood out to you from what we've just experienced, and allowing as just that open conversation to be truly open-handed with it, and to trust the Holy Spirit is going to bring the right things to surface at times, to open up that door, and to just prayerfully just say, hey, can we just pause for 30 seconds? Just want to pray for a minute. And then I just want to hear from you. What was important about this time? What was important about this experience that we just had? And Paul uses the phrase, we'll never be in this same room, in this same setting again. Is there anything that you'd like to say? Is there something that you would, just like to acknowledge to someone else in the room from what you just saw? And creating those sort of little moments can do a lot, and that's really a facilitation style thing. If you know that you're more by the book, hey, I gotta, my next activity is coming up, it's a little bit tougher to sort of have those intentional pauses in there. But man, if you can even intentionally build some of those in, it's amazing what 30 seconds of silence will do to allow people to process, to allow them to articulate, that first phrase that they're willing to share on something. So.
I think if I'm a member of two teams that have been longstanding, and the members of both teams have at least gone through the GRIP. Many of them have gone GRIP and Birkman. And I'm the team leader for both of the teams. And one of the things that I've been doing is modeling, verbalizing my preferences. I hate meetings. And if I'm forced to endure a meeting that's not going anywhere, one of the things that happens is I go fishing in my head. My blue square circle, I disappear. And so when meetings start, I let them know right up front, there will be regular breaks. And I'll explain why, because I'm modeling for them where we're going, how we're going to get there, and why we're getting there. And one of the things I've observed over time is other people have reciprocated or repeated the same process with some of their preferences. Because we're learning who we are as we're working through the material that's provided with the assessment. And we're also working through a project that the teams are attending to. And so just my modeling some of my issues has set us up for others. And I think in some ways that has prevented some of those issues where we might have had to go through the confession and forgiveness and affirmation. So it's just maybe another way of dealing with it, but coming at it with preventive ideas in mind.
I like that.
Can I just move us back to affirmation for a minute? Most of the time, when most teams that I've worked with, especially even in training, the most awkward moment is the first day of affirmation. Because this is so unlike us naturally. And there's always this, I hope it's pregnant pause, but there's always this, okay, we're going to do this and we're going to work around the group and that kind of stuff. And at first, this is the most awkward. It just, you can just see everybody going, what now? And then day 2 comes and they're like, this is pretty good. Day 3 comes and it's like, why are we going through all this stuff? Let's just move to this affirmation thing. This is wonderful. And the number of times people have said, nobody's ever said this to me. Nobody's ever affirmed me. Nobody's ever, I've never felt like this. I've heard that over and over. And so, to me, we've been talking about, forgiveness and confession, but I think affirmation is really the starting point in so many ways. And I've dealt with people who say, we heard this is coming up. I don't even want to be a part of this. This scares me. I don't like it. But at the end, they always say, wow, that was amazing. So we struggle with affirmation. Those of you who've led teams and do affirmation or done a training and did affirmation at the end, it's often scary for people. It was even in this last training, Tony was part of that, even even online when we're doing it on Zoom. Sometimes it's like, wow, now what do I do? And you could just tell this Zoom needs a stress meter on the side. And there's times it would be really, really high. Yeah.
That's good. Yeah, I think it's definitely it's the opportunity that every team has to improve. Right. I've never been a team that just exhausted their affirmation, the affirmation of each other. And we talk about it sometimes being the antidote to sarcasm. Confession and forgiveness requires a level of trust and safety. The only way that you're going to get there is to start having the walls come down a little bit. Walls are built by sarcasm. Affirmation begins to tear that down because I'm beginning to see something in you that is real, and it's something that I'm acknowledging to you, and it's something that allows us then to have enough safety, enough of a relationship there to where we can move forward in that. And so I would just, if there's a team that's really sarcastic, affirmation becomes that much more significant to them as the antidote. But if we like to use wall analogies in the IDOE world as far as how we're connected to each other, different stones, that type of thing, think of this as the mortar, right? Affirmation is the glue that's going to allow us to stay connected in that. So I want to shift a little. Well, actually, anyone want to respond to that? Any thoughts on that?
I totally agree with the need for affirmation, but I've also seen sometimes in Christian culture where there's comfortability with affirmation, but not with truth. So everybody can go around the room and say the nicest thing about everybody else because culturally that's really been rewarded and they feel good about themselves. But the ability to speak hard truths isn't there as much, and honesty and how you've really impacted me or maybe even hurt me, maybe unintentionally because of the way that you're built or the actual dynamics that are at play. So I guess I would just caution that sometimes affirmations in Christian, and I don't see this as much in non-Christian groups, but there's something very cultural about being nice. And so that was just my thought. That's what my mind
That's
was.
good. Well, and let's take it back to the idea of if it's not the starting point of a progression and we stall out there, we're still an immature team, right? Like, that's where if it doesn't get beyond affirmation to confession, forgiveness, shared brokenness, those things, it's not a progressing team. It's a superficial, we're nice to each other team that's very if I experience that, then it tells me there's a lot more under the surface that's not being said if a team stalls out just on that. If it's not a gateway drug, if it's not leading to something more, yeah, it's a problem. And I think that's a great call out. So I
Nice.
want to,
Affirmation is a gateway drug. That's a good quote.
yeah, put that one on a bumper sticker, buddy.
Yeah.
Let me shift gears a little bit to the idea of uh, I know at least I think all of you on here have worked in some shape or another of cross-cultural team, and the piece that I want to pull out, or the piece I want to ask about, is cultural confession and forgiveness. It's part of where our society's at today, right? Like there's a whole conversation going on around why would I need to confess something that I personally didn't do to you, right? Why would we need to? So I'm just curious, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, I can tell you some things that you know, Paul Ford and I have sort of experienced in some cross-cultural settings and the role this plays, but talk to me about that. What are your thoughts on cultural confession or forgiveness of different things?
Oh, I have a ton to say on this topic.
That's why I brought it up, Carolyn. It was really,
Okay. Yeah, it was actually for my personal cathartic. Well, here in the Portland area, and I think all over, many areas, I don't know all of your areas where you're living, definitely the Seattle area is in the same boat, but race relations have been at an all-time high. And those of you who've watched the news, Portland had a ton of riots. And so it's impacted our churches here in the area with that exact question. And I immediately, when you said that, I was thinking of an interaction that I had. There was our senior pastor was meeting with myself because I was the kind of therapist person that was most involved with race issues at the church. Our one African-American employee, and then probably the longest standing other male pastor who is just like the most loving man ever. And the conversation evolved, and the other male pastor that I described as loving also has a history as a lawyer. And the question that you asked was on the table. And the lawyer said that he didn't feel like he needed to ever apologize for something he didn't do because he had never had those. He personally didn't commit the acts that people are asking for apologies for. And I knew that the African-American person, being good friends with her, had different feelings about it, but was in a position with 3 white people in the room where, like, how do you say, well, I really do want an apology? So I gave my own personal example as a woman in ministry. And I think, and that example is that in our congregation, there was a period of time when they went from one position about their belief about what women could do and what women couldn't do, and then they changed it and they went to another belief. And that was really great and wonderful. The decision, I'm fine with the decision, and 99% of the people are fine with the decision. The missing piece for me as the recipient of that was the lack of acknowledgement of how previous behavior was hurtful. And so I shared that in that context, how I never received an apology. Like, for our church has been in existence for 40 years. And so for 40 years of women, we're now saying we're changing our doctrinal view. But for 40 years of how we've interacted with women, we don't own any of that, even though these people were there during that time or were brought on staff. So I just expressed that it's not that I hold you accountable, but your acknowledgement of what happened to somebody can be very healing for that person and make them feel very humanized, even though I'm not saying it was your fault that it happened that way. So that was our conversation. And I know this is a super hot topic because people, have very different opinions about it.
Thanks for sharing.
I think let me touch on this. So again, move away maybe from the race relationship, because especially here in Canada, we don't have the same degree, although we have it with First Nations people, is where that comes in. But I was in a meeting a couple of weeks ago, and in the middle of a meeting, one of the members of the meeting expressed a long-term hurt. So a change was happening, and this person finally, I mean, I've known this person for a long time, finally felt that they could actually share a hurt that happened years ago. And the people involved are no longer there, no longer. And so I had a chance to stop and say, how does that feel right now? I mean, here it is all this time, you're sharing this, how does it feel? And then was able to say, I am so sorry for the way you were treated. I am so sorry. Please forgive the person and forgive us for allowing this to sit all this time without addressing it. And watched healing happen in those few moments. A couple of days later, went back to that person, said, how you doing on this? And they just said, there's been a load lifted off me on this. I can move ahead now without, well, I had nothing to do with that. I had nothing. And it did cost me nothing to say, I am so sorry. Please forgive. Please move ahead. And I think I don't have to own that. I don't have to say, I feel really bad that I did this because I didn't do it. But at the same time, I have to offer a sense that there really is a way to address this, and I can do it lovingly and carefully. Anyway, that's just, I think that I see so much value in that. And I don't see that as being demeaning to me at all. But it's so affirming to the person who's been hurt, in my opinion.
Knowing cross-culturally a lot of the ways that North Americans are perceived, knowing some of those cultural things, it's a similar to what both Carolyn and Ken just shared. It's a powerful opportunity for us to acknowledge, for us to call ourselves out, to call our culture out. Sorry for the way that we've handled this in the past, and really, again, some of our activities that we have create space for this in a way that, again, I don't know is common, but if you think about the cultural values activity that we do on the front end of, let's talk about some of the things that block body life, where we talk about entitlement, dissatisfaction, self-centeredness, sarcasm, blame, all of these different things. These are not global things, right? Those are not, if you go to an African culture and you go through, hey, what are the cultural values that block body life here? They are not the same. And so by doing that sort of an activity of just, hey, what are the things that are getting in the way from our culture, from us being able to really connect together? What are those? And then being willing to say, hey, you know what? The fact that I come from a very entitled, narcissistic, self-centered culture that really is I-driven, I'm sorry that in that challenges our team. That doesn't foster the unity that we're looking for, and to acknowledge that it's a similar thing to where there's a brokenness that can happen in that space that doesn't have to be filled by us then doing. It's filled by the Holy Spirit, right? That's where the healing will come from, in that. But where others can have that opportunity to sort of share from that, not even from a personal, and it's initially when I thought about this, or when I talked with Paul or process, well, isn't that sort of just a guarded way for me to confess my own things? No, it's not. It's a different thing. There's a personal aspect to where these are the things that I personally deal with, but as a culture, these are the things that have blocked our cultures being able to effectively work together. And so really having that opportunity to do that and to model it first, again, because we come from such a prideful society, prideful culture of North America, to humble ourselves in acknowledging that and then asking for forgiveness. Extremely powerful and cross-cultural teams or cross-cultural venues to be able to do that. So if if you're on a long-standing team and you're going through a stretch of where you've sort of plateaued, where you're not seeing that continued progression of depth with your team, something to maybe think through is, what would it look like for us to, pause and just evaluate our culture and the impact of culture on some of these things. And obviously there's a lot of tools that can sort of help with that, but honestly, rather than making it really complex, allowing each culture to spend a little bit of time thinking about what are the things that block body life from their culture that they're bringing to the table, for us to identify them, acknowledge them, and then have a time of sharing can be really powerful. Nate, curious on your experience with just with that, with what you've observed as far as the confession, forgiveness, sort of from a cultural experience. What are your thoughts on that?
It's we work in Asia, in Malaysia right now, and it takes quite a bit of time to build safety for people, especially in shame cultures, and especially I found that it's really important to have approachability. Um, so when people approach you or whatever with a need or something, that you're quick to listen and slow to speak, uh, being sympathetic to what they're feeling. Doesn't mean you always grant what they want or something, but you're trying to look out for their best and that sort of thing. And so those kind of things over a longer process will help build relationships with people cross-culturally. But I think it was really a good point of pointing out, John, um, I think that's a interesting exercise of what are some of the uh, relational barriers that people have. And I think for some cultures as well, there may be quite a few longstanding grudges, even and or status between different peoples, as they may perceive themselves as different statuses, and their ability to really even freely talk in a room of people that they may perceive themselves as being different. So yeah, I think that would be a interesting level of cultural study and growth to work on that.
Good. Well, I know we're coming toward the top of the hour here. I want to be sensitive of your time. Just a couple of updates, just different things that are coming for you to be aware of. So again, this was part one of probably what will end up being at least a 7-part series of really digging into the values. We have a group that's been really trying to unpack some of these things around what are the I to we processes that need to occur in order for a team to thrive, in order for a team to truly have that supernatural fruit. And so we'll continue the articles, so keep an eye out for those. A couple of changes just so that you're aware of that are going to be coming to the website soon. One is that it's kind of complicated right now for people that are not coaches to figure out how to order assessments. We're going to simplify that down. So starting actually probably next week, it'll be live. There will be a place where people can go in and order their own GRIP assessments, and they can actually order a GRIP-Birkman assessment as well. They will be required to have a coach. So if they don't have a coach already, then one will be assigned to you, sort of like a court of law, right? No, but the idea is that they'll give us some parameters and then we'll assign out a coach to them. So we're still maintaining that that integrity piece with the GRIP-Birkman. We just feel that's so important with that, with the GRIP, because so many people are trying to use it, whether it be with small groups, with an entire congregation, with different things. We just felt like we needed to have an opportunity for people to be able to have access to that more easily. So that's being set up. The other thing for a lot of you is that we are also setting up the group discounts on the GRIP only. So where groups want to do sort of, hey, we're going to have an entire group go through this, the group discounts are going to be automatically built in, so that if you order, as a coach, if you go in and order 10, then there will be a discount that it's automatically taken off of the GRIPs then for you in that. So it won't look like a major overhaul of things, but just know that some of those things, again, where we're driving toward team, driving toward accessibility so that more people have the opportunity, we're working towards some of those things. So the other thing that I will say is, I know we've been talking about the Chinese translation for a while. The first draft of that is complete now, so it should hopefully now be less than 2 months before it's live up on the website, as far as the first language. Once we get the kinks worked out of that, then we have on deck to go ahead and add French, Spanish, Russian. I think those are the next ones that we already have translated. So they're just sort of sitting there waiting, but we got to figure out as an organization how to do that first, do that well before we dive into it. So that just to keep you guys up on some of the things that are happening. And as always, welcome your feedback and input on different things. So thanks for making time this morning to join us. Carolyn, would you close us in prayer?
Sure. Dear Heavenly Father, we're just excited to partner with you in whatever you're doing around the world. And we humbly asked for your power, your enablement to use these tools and the other life experiences that you've given with us to further the work of your kingdom, to encourage the people that you've created, and to lead better together. And so I pray your blessing over each person in this group today as they go forth and whatever their work calls of them today, and also as they continue to use the GRIP with the people that you've brought into their lives. And I pray these things in your name. Amen.
Thank you guys so much. Have a great day.
Thank you very much. God bless you all.
Thanks so much.